Now, David Bjork, the marketing editor at Kantar Index, is in London and joins me now with more on the devastation to the global financial community. David, of course, Cantor Fitzgerald, the US arm of the company, one of those very, very seriously hit. Any more you can tell us? We believe there were 800 to 1,000 members of staff working at Cantor. We know that at the moment about 200 to 300 have been accounted for. Any more you can tell me?
Absolutely not, I'm afraid. This is obviously, our thoughts are entirely with our colleagues and their families, and any kind of announcement on that basis until there has been a full head count will, I'm afraid, be kept in head office in New York.
David, I was just saying, it's a sad, perhaps, comment, but we do have to talk about what the markets will be making of all of this. Tell us the problems of New York opening. Richard Grasso, the chairman of the exchange, made clear there is power, there is telephones, but there are practical problems, aren't there?
I think people who are unfamiliar with New York as a financial centre, demographically, for want of a better expression, is that the rubble and the general devastation and the huge number of component brokers and banks that had offices in the World Trade Center, they will all have all their computer software duly duplicated. That's not going to be a problem. Settlement's not going to be a problem. The liaison that they have globally with their offices in Europe and also in the Far East is not going to be a problem. What is a problem is replacing the physical side of the business, where it can be traded accurately, where compliance can go, where regulatory controls are comfortable, and also safety, Richard.
I saw one quote from Japan, from one Japanese banker, who said that one reason that there wasn't much trading taking place in Europe and Asia, because let's face it, European banks can still trade between themselves and with Asia, was that, as one banker put it, we aren't about to ditch our morals and speculate at a time like this.
It's a very Japanese comment, and I'm certain it's probably made in the spirit that it was made. Whether you could actually adopt those morals and attitudes for the rest of the world, well, I think that remains to be seen. But I think there is a general feeling that everybody knows that the US stock market has led the world during the course of the last 20 years. And suddenly, when you don't have them, there is obviously going to be the reticence on the part of traders, because there has been some unkind comments like, oh, well, this means the United States is going to enter recession. I think that's a very strange remark, because we don't know the resolve of the US people. We don't know the level of contribution, which I'm sure will be from central banks, providing liquidity, etc.
David, many thanks indeed. David Bjork from Cantor joining me in the studio. That's all from London now. For the moment, back to Relitza in Atlanta.
Richard, thank you. The U.S. Midwest still feels the impact of Tuesday's attacks, but it's an impact of a different kind, one that some are calling completely unnecessary. Gas prices in some states have skyrocketed after the three crashes. Deborah Marchini investigates why.
$4 a gallon in Ohio, and drivers waiting in line for the privilege of paying it. Gasoline a relative bargain at one Conoco station in Oklahoma at $2.99, if you can get it. But there was none left. The highest price we heard about, $5.19 in Indiana. That came as news to one customer. It jumped from $1.99 while she was filling up.
I thought, well, I should have my car full by now, so I glanced up at the tank, and when I did, it said $42, and I said, whoa, for a half a tank of gas?
Ironically, the farther you travel from the attacks in New York and Washington, the more expensive the gas, the longer the lines. America's heartland is particularly vulnerable to disruptions in gas supplies because its system for moving fuel is overstressed. In the week before the attack, gas in the Midwest cost an average of 12 cents more a gallon than for the country as a whole. Regional psychology also plays a part.
It's like what I call the St. Louis snow effect. One of the things that we see in St. Louis is we have about 4 snowstorms a year. And they're typically not a big deal, doesn't disrupt traffic for very long. But if you go to your local grocery store, you'll find 10 registers running full open with customers 10 deep, all buying milk and bread. And I think American consumers have been trained to believe that if there is some impact that could involve the Middle East, you better gas up. And that's what they did all at once. And the supply system is not geared to handle that sort of surge in demand.
Oil analysts say temporary terminal shutdowns in Louisiana and on both coasts explain some of the rise in gas prices, perhaps a few cents worth. The rest reflects drivers' fear and a desire by gas station owners to take advantage of it.
Consumers should not panic. They should remain calm. Our supplies are fine at this point. There's no need to form long gas lines and thinking that our supplies are going to run out.
Gas station owners were among the few seeking to profit from the pain of terrorism. Though many travelers were stranded by the temporary grounding of flights, AAA says it's had no complaints about attempts to jack up hotel or rental car rates. A host of individuals have tried to auction items related to the Trade Center tragedy on eBay. The company, citing respect for the victims and their kin, has for now suspended sales of items directly related to the Trade Center and the Pentagon. The suspension will last until October 1st. Deborah Marchiani, CNN Financial News, New York.
As we've been reporting, the search for survivors of the devastating attacks on the World Trade Center is continuing in New York City, but there's little optimism about finding any more. Officials in the city have asked for 6,000 body bags, a grim reminder of the scale of the devastation. Thousands of U.S. law enforcement officers, meanwhile, are involved in the hunt for those responsible for the attacks. Sources say up to 50 people may have planned and executed them. Several of the suspected hijackers have now been identified, with police searching a number of homes in Florida. Two men who came to the state for flight training are alleged to have piloted two of the crashed aircraft. The FBI says the investigation is moving forward at high speed.
We have, in the last 24 hours, taken the manifests and used those as an evidentiary base, and have talked to many of the families of the victims, and have successfully, I believe, identified many of the hijackers on each of the 4 flights that went down. We also have identified, through a number of leads, principally at the cities of origin, a number of individuals whom we believe may have had something to do with the hijackings, and we are pursuing those leads aggressively.
We go back to New York now, and CNN's Garrick Utley. Garrick?
Thank you very much, Jonathan. We want to take a moment now and address perhaps what is the most painful and certainly personal question in the aftermath of this tragedy. Here's the situation. Imagine for a moment that you are living here in New York City or in the New York area, and that on Tuesday morning your husband or your wife, your spouse or a brother or a sister or even a child who works went off to work in the World Trade Center. And you saw what happened, and that loved one did not come home. Question: how long do you hold out hope? How long can you realistically hold out hope? When is it time to let go? Who tells you it's time to let go realistically? It doesn't get more personal or painful than this, and here's CNN's Elizabeth Cohen with an example.
Andrew Zucker started his day Tuesday on the 86th floor of the South Tower of the World Trade Center. After the first explosion, the one in the North Tower, his wife called.
And he said, I'm okay, I'll call you back, and he hung up.
But then his building blew up.
If I know Andrew, he stopped to help somebody, and I don't even want to think about what happened, and I don't know what happened to him, but he's just not here.
But thinks she must, because like many people who stood in line to find out about their missing loved ones, Erica says she still thinks her husband may still be alive. So while Erica worked the phones Wednesday, her sister, Naomi Konovich, and family friend Susan Feldman went out on a search, one hospital at a time, starting at New York University Medical Center, where there were no answers.
Bellevue, I think, is on like 27th. It's only like 3 or 4 more blocks down.
After Bellevue, on to Beekman Hospital. No one had seen him there either.
Someone told us actually to go over to the medical examiner's office.
They told Naomi to gather dental records and hair samples in case they'd have to identify his body.
They don't have lists of people who were found dead. They don't have anything.
Late in the day, after buying a mask to keep out the dust circulating after all the explosions, she checked yet more public offices. Still, no one had heard of Andrew Zucker.
They said there were a couple of John Does in the hospital. We're hoping to find that maybe one of them is him.
In the end, a frustrated Naomi distributed flyers to the media.
He's about 6'1", heavy set with the big shoulders and a big chest.
While her sister kept up the round of calls to the hospitals, to the morgue.
If you do see him or you're with him, just tell him we all love him and just to hold in there, and we just want him to come home. We need him to come home.
Elizabeth Cohen, CNN, New York.
One family, one case, very painful one of thousands, if you stop and think of it, thousands of families facing a similar dilemma. The search for possible survivors, if there are going to be any at all, it will take weeks, perhaps a month or even more. Who is to say when it's time to let go? Who is to give that answer? Relitza?
And Garrick, certainly the rescuers are searching, but they're going very, very slow because they want to make sure that they avoid anything that could hurt any potential survivors. And also there are many risks involved in the area where they're working.
There are the risks there to the rescue teams. There are also there's the question of moving this material, which could hurt perhaps if someone who is still alive. They have to go very, very carefully. And it's also interesting and important, really, to understand that officials here are being very, very cautious. From the very first day, they have not offered any undue optimism about how this is all going to turn out. They're not making any estimates as to how many are believed to be trapped in the World Trade Center. They just say in the thousands. No false hopes are being raised here by anyone, and that's the harsh reality, and it's tough to take.
Garrick, thank you. And many major events around the world are being canceled or postponed in the aftermath of the attacks. The United Nations General Assembly decided Wednesday to put off next week's Children's Summit in New York. And officials at the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank say they may cancel their annual meeting set for the end of this month in Washington. Sweden is calling off this weekend's summit of leaders from 14 nations. Even baseball, the sport long considered the U.S. pastime, is on hold. All major league games set for Wednesday and Thursday have been canceled.
The U.S. government is also imposing new airline safety procedures after the attacks. Once they take effect, boarding an airplane in this country may never be the same. Charles Feldman has more on that.
Modern life depends heavily upon air transport. Government officials clearly want to get things moving.
All Americans want us to move as quickly and prudently as possible to return our national airspace system to normal. And we will.
But the definition of the word normal will change dramatically by the next time you take a flight. For one thing, you will see a much bigger federal law enforcement role at major airports. Some 400 U.S. Customs agents and 300 Border Patrol officers will join about 300 U.S. deputy marshals to beef up airport security checkpoints. Forget about curbside check-ins. And you will no longer be allowed to check in for a flight at a hotel or other off-airport location. Only passengers with tickets will be permitted to go past airport screeners, and passengers will not be allowed to board any plane carrying any sort of cutting instrument, metal or plastic, and that includes nail files. And now, for the first time in a quarter century, there is discussion about resuming in some form the old Sky Marshal program that placed armed federal agents on select flights from 1971 to 1974 following a rash of hijackings. The cost and feasibility of having federal, state, or municipal law enforcement officials taking over airport security from private firms is also being studied. But who will pay for the new security measures? The airlines? The government? You?
Ultimately, this kind of policy change in the aviation area is going to be borne by one of two groups, either the passengers or the taxpayer. In the short term, of course, it might be other groups such as the airports or the airlines.
And it is that short term that is bound to be the most troubling for the airline industry, already financially weakened by a faltering economy. Add to that, the airlines are losing an estimated $250 million each day while a flight ban remains in effect. But whatever the cost more security will be, safety and terrorism experts say from what we know now, it is unlikely any of the proposed measures could have prevented the sort of attack the world witnessed this week. Charles Feldman, CNN, Los Angeles.
With the Federal Aviation Administration's cancellation of all flights, you might have gotten the impression that there have been no aircraft of any kind in U.S. skies since Tuesday, but that actually hasn't been the case. Joining us from the Pentagon is Mark Potter to explain. Mark.
Well, good morning, Lisa. What many people may not know is that the U.S. military is actually controlling all the airspace over this country right now. All civilian planes, domestic and international, are grounded, and so the only planes in the sky right now belong to the U.S. military. Here in Washington and in New York and other cities, citizens have looked up to see fighter jets flying overhead, and that is known as a Combat Air Patrol, or a CAP.